how to fix Britain. So with the recent council election results in England, the general election last year, and Brexit, you might be a little bit confused as to the direction the country is heading in, and if it's getting worse. Brexit, the banking crisis, and devolution, amongst other things, certainly left a lot of difficulties the country as a whole had to overcome. But that doesn't mean they're not fixable. In this video, we're going to take a detailed look at all the problems Britain faces and come up with a solution. This is the story of how to fix Britain. So the 2018 council elections did have one definitive result in England.
Well, it was a very disappointing result, but it wasn't entirely surprising result because when I took over as leader or interim leader 2 months ago, there was no campaign. Absolutely nothing had been done when they should have been planned at least 6 months to 12 months before.
UKIP lost out big time. So what does this mean for Brexit? Well, the UK Independence Party was a party set up with the main aim of getting the UK to leave the EU.
No matter how hard you've worked, what's the point? What's the point of UKIP now?
So now that Brexit has happened, they are largely seen as spent forces. Since the Brexit vote, the party has tried to focus its attention on terrorism and the type of Brexit that we will get. But the party never changed its name. So the electorate is now under the assumption that Britain will leave the EU. Hence why the loss in votes. The loss doesn't summarise how Britain will leave the EU, or if Britain should leave the EU at all. These policies are all laid out by other parties, with the Lib Dems offering a vote on the final deal, and Labour and the Conservatives pushing for different forms of Brexit. But we can now definitively say the process of leaving the EU has begun, and won't begin again unless we somehow go back in ages from now. But just because UKIP have now gone, it doesn't mean that they haven't left a stain on British politics. First of all, they are a third party. This is how Douglas Carswell, a UKIP MP, was reacted to after the Brexit vote.
Mr. Douglas Carswell!
I thank the Prime Minister for giving us last week's great exercise in democracy.
And any rising one-issue party in the UK can take voters away from the main parties of the Tories and Labour. This gives the eventual Prime Minister less authority over their own party and less power in Parliament. But the third parties can also push for policies that break up the main parties. The more popular the third party, the more popular the individual policy, and the more likely it will lead to a potentially divisive referendum in which party alliances are split apart in favour of populism.
But I am far from alone in fearing a bad deal or indeed no deal. I will now take the steps necessary to make sure that Scotland will have a choice at the end of this process.
The Scottish referendum led to more devolution powers for the UK. So now instead of just having the Prime Minister as the main authority in the UK, there are plenty of other people with equal and opposite power over at least part of the UK. There's the Mayor of London, the Mayor of Manchester, the Mayor of Liverpool, the Mayor of South Yorkshire, the Mayor of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, the Mayor of Tees Valley, the Mayor of the West of England, the Mayor of the Welsh Midlands, the head of the Scottish Parliament, the head of the Welsh Parliament, the Northern Ireland Assembly, the head of the Bank of England, the head of Unite, the Union, Trump, Merkel, Macron, Juncker, and Putin when he likes to stick his nose in. That doesn't even mention all the cabinet members, opposition leaders, MPs, lords, party members, and activists, all who have more of an influence in how the country is run than an average voter. So is it really possible to run Britain given all these powers? Well, a good Prime Minister is judged on their autonomy and competency. That is, gaining a lot of votes and doing a good job.
And if we vote leave and take back control, I believe that this Thursday can be our country's Independence Day.
The Brexit vote for leave was made on the intention that we leave the European Court of Justice and have authority over our democracy. Now, how much democracy versus autonomy you want a Prime Minister to have really depends on which side of the political spectrum you stand.
I have only one thing to say. You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
People on the right tend to prefer it when a Prime Minister is decisive, such as Margaret Thatcher, who made controversial decisions, such as the closure of the coal mines, but stuck to them and didn't U-turn.
David the Chameleon burst out into the big wide world.
When Labour was first trying to deal with the fresh young challenge from David Cameron, they came up with this: Dave the Chameleon, the ultimate non-conviction politician who let the backdrop define him.
From now on, he would only tell people whatever he thought they wanted to hear, whether he and the Blue Party liked it or not.
Whereas David Cameron, who constantly offered referendums to the country, was seen as a much more indecisive gambler. A gamble that won him the first term with the Scottish referendum, but very quickly lost him his second term. On the other side of the political spectrum, left-wing people tend to prefer prime ministers who are a little more democratic. A lot of Labour voters voted Leave because they believe in the will of the people. Jeremy Corbyn is equally popular as he is seen as anti-establishment, and it also explains why UKIP votes went towards Labour at the last general election, because democracy and the will of the people was a huge reason for leaving the EU.
It concludes that Iraq has chemical and biological weapons, that Saddam has continued to produce them, that he has existing and active military plans for the use of chemical and biological weapons, which could be activated within 45 minutes, including against his own Shia population, and that he is actively trying to acquire nuclear weapons capability.
For all of this, I express more sorrow, regret, and apology than you may ever know or can believe.
On the other hand, Tony Blair was massively unpopular because despite having a huge majority, he decided, under false pretenses, to start an unsuccessful war in Iraq. The left hates incompetent authority, and the Labour Party suffered for a long time as a result.
Does anyone else just want to make this stop? And actually...
When it comes to Brexit, a balance has to be struck between authoritarian decisions and democracy. Have too many House of Lords amendments, and the left are going to brandish the government as the incompetent authority, and the right are going to brandish the government as indecisive, and the next general election will be a hung parliament again. The same would happen if the EU takes too much power for itself. But the government has to balance leaving the EU with upholding the economy. With a strong economy, it can invest in public services, such as the NHS and schools, to gain other types of voters. But votes happen instantly, while an economy grows and shrinks over a long period of time. So that's why the politicians always focus on rhetoric and appealing to large swathes of the population instead of nitty-gritty details.
Brexit means Brexit.
Now, in the UK local elections, the Conservatives proved to do well in Leave areas. But for many, there is a huge concern facing the country that we simply don't have enough detail soon enough. And as I said earlier, the right prefer decisive government. The government still has to sort out the Northern Irish border, the customs union deal, the single market deal, and immigration, amongst other things. If we run out of time, it is more likely that Remainers will want us to go back and buy more time than pull a no deal. But this will alienate core Tory voters. So deliver on Brexit and keep the economy going without too much austerity, and we might see yet another Tory government. But what if it all goes wrong? Will Labour suddenly do well?
The Conservatives at this time are the only party who are going to deliver Brexit.
And could you consider voting for them?
And on that I could consider voting for them because of that.
The problem for Labour gaining seats boils down to their core voters, split on Brexit. Old Northerners voted Leave, while young students voted in support Remain, but they all support Labour. That makes it hard for Labour to gain seats on the Brexit issue, and means they have to push on other areas such as the NHS, Windrush and austerity. If Brexit went apart, it doesn't mean the Liberal Democrats would gain either. You have to remember it was the Remain students who have their student fees brought up higher as a result of a decision made by the Lib Dems while in the coalition government.
We made a pledge, we didn't stick to it, and for that I am sorry.
So if Brexit isn't the issue for an opposition party to win on, how could an opposition party gain a sizable majority in government? Well, there is plenty of issues keeping voters away from each of the main parties. The Tories and the NHS, Labour and anti-Semitism, the Lib Dems and their anti-democratic approach. But there is a conspiracy that's in Labour's interest to tank the economy with an opposition party in power. Let me explain. Vote against the things that create certainty and stability, particularly relating to Brexit, and you can then claim they're doing a bad job. But the opposition has to hide its tracks and not deter Leave voters in the process.
The British Parliament has approved a motion to negotiate some form of customs union as it exits the European Union. Most members of the ruling Conservative Party decided not to take part, paving way for the mostly symbolic vote. The vote is a non-binding motion and does not require the government to follow its instructions.
Meanwhile, the Tory government has to be seen to leave the customs union and single market, while retaining as much access as possible for imports and trades with other nations, both inside and outside the EU. Do this and it creates more certainty for business and keeps voters on all sides on side. The Tories still have to negotiate this with few months remaining, but Labour, on the other hand, seem a lot more confused of what their approach would be.
Well, we've long championed being in a customs union with the EU and the benefits of that.
This is the kind of nitty-gritty detail that voters don't really care about, but they will understand the rhetoric and hype coming from the media.
We don't have targets for removals.
For many, Brexit was a reaction to large numbers of immigration coming into the country, and controlling immigration should be a large response to that.
There's hell on this chaos, he stabbed people and shot people.
The Joe Cox murder and rise in racial hate crimes after the vote made many believe that Britain was now racist and an inward-looking country.
We were getting onto a bus and a car was driving by, and seeing as we were wearing our suits and our kippah on our head, the car slowed down and shouted, "You Jewish."
But if anything, the Windrush scandal and anti-Semitism row in the Labour Party, a reason why they lost Barnes in the local elections, proves that the UK is anything but racist.
Now, another town this week joined the list of shame, where sex gangs have roamed seemingly unchecked to prey on girls as young as 11, raping, drugging, beating, trafficking, and potentially even murdering them in the process. What's happened in Telford could be the worst case of a paedophile gang involved in widespread child abuse the country has ever seen. But as I read the names of those convicted, something struck me. In Telford, they included Azir Ali Mahmoud, Mubarak Ali, and Adel Ali. In a similar case in Rotherham, Razwan Razag, Adil Hussein, and Zafran Ramzan were among the guilty. To Rochdale now, Mohammed Amin, Abdul Aziz, and Mohammed Sajid, among others, were convicted. And now to Oxford, where it was Anjam Dogar, Kamir Jamil, and Zishan Ahmed ending up behind bars.
On the other side of the equation, terrorism and sex grooming might also prove that Britain has a problem with expressing its concerns relating to minority communities without being labelled racist. In the coming years, the government needs to both set reasonable immigration targets, but also come across as a welcoming country. This, for any party in charge, is a hard balance. We need immigrants to run services at the NHS, but not to use them or our schools. The party with an immigration strategy that both presents an actionable target and gives solutions to all these issues will win over more voters. But both parties are currently facing issues regarding being seen as racist or too liberal.
The border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland is invisible, but people here know exactly where it is. Essentially, it's where I'm standing right now, and if you look over here, it actually runs along the middle of that river.
With regards to Brexit and Northern Ireland, the Tories will have to end free movement of people in order to be seen as delivering Brexit and winning the next election. But an open border with Ireland presents problems for what might get into the UK. We are months from a final deal to be announced, and yet we are still waiting on details about this from the government, when really all the UK needs is information from Ireland about the amount of drugs and weapons and criminals that could be coming into the Irish border, and then for the Irish border to be our shared border, our common border. That is our border. Yes, they're not part of the UK, but at the end of the day, they're part of the same bit of land. Of course, there's a huge catch-22 for voters in the next UK election, whenever it might be.
The headline reads, a landmark study has linked Tory austerity to 120,000 deaths.
If they agree with the Brexit deal, they might still be fed up of years of Tory rule. But most likely, Labour and the Lib Dems will have amendments and changes, and even a new referendum on the final Brexit deal on offer. So let's say, at the next general election, Labour win. Nobody will know whether it would be a reflection of the Brexit deal or a reflection of Tory rule as a whole. If voters disagree with the Brexit deal, it doesn't make anything any easier, and it could lead to dividing the country once again as to what to do next. The decision laid out for Britain really depends on you. Do you want more of a say, in which case I'd advise on voting for the left? Or do you want the government to have more authority, in which case I'd advise on voting for the right? But the government is still split right down the middle on this, hence why we have a hung parliament. We simply don't know if we want the government to deliver Brexit regardless, or if we want the government held to account at every point. And it applies if you're a hard Brexiteer or a Remainer. A Brexiteer wants Remainers to shut up and go away, while Remainers want Brexiteers to shut up and go away. But it's difficult to vote when both have seats in the main parties. Of course, we don't know what the next few years will throw at us, but voting with an intention of stabilising the country for something we can all agree on, such as what happened in the rise and fall of UKIP, is the way forward. That's how to fix Britain. But do you agree with me? Join in the debate below and subscribe.